Hey, welcome to another episode of DOCasts. In this episode, we're going to go over securing PHPMyAdmin Part 2. Now, in this episode, I've brought PHPMyAdmin to my local development computer. And this is just going to allow me to go ahead and speed things up a little bit. Now, this is the same procedures you may use on your DigitalOcean droplet. You just need to go ahead and SSH in to your droplet before going ahead and making these changes. But with that said, let's take a look at the address that I'm using. If I click on the address bar here, we'll see that I'm using sites.php/phpmyadmin. So that's obviously a subdirectory within the directory that the virtual host for sites.php is pointing to. So what does that look like? Well, here in my configuration file for my PHPMyAdmin, you can see that I have a directory here and a virtual host. Now, this virtual host is pointing to my port 80, and the server name for this is sites.php, which is what we're seeing within the address bar here. And it's also pointing to my document root for my sites folder under users John Sanchez and sites. Now, this can be changed at any time, but this is where my sites folder is currently. In the directory here, we have the ability to override all, which is going to give our htaccess file the ability to override everything. Then we have the options here. We have the order, deny, allow, just like we did within the previous DOCast episode on securing my PHPMyAdmin. And we have the deny from all, but we're allowing from my local host, which is also known as 127.0.0.1. Now, just to refresh your memory, in the previous episode, we were on DigitalOcean with my droplet that was set up with VistaCP. Now, as you can see, VistaCP set it up so that the directory was pointing to user share PHPMyAdmin. And the same thing here with order, deny, and allow. We're denying from all IP addresses except for those we're allowing and specifying right here. And of course, we have the options, the directory index, and the override all, which is allowing our htaccess file within the PHPMyAdmin directory to go ahead and override whatever it needs to or whatever we specify within that file. Now, since I'm bringing it locally, I'm not using VistaCP with my Apache or my PHPMyAdmin configuration. This was all installed manually and configured manually. This is one example of not working with VistaCP's installation. So this should help for those that aren't working with VistaCP but are working with Apache and PHPMyAdmin. As another refresher, in the previous episode on part 1, we went ahead and we implemented two things here. We denied access to certain IP addresses and only allowed it to specific IP addresses. And for this example, we're using just my local host. And then we also added a simple authentication system using plain text via the htaccess utility. And that involves setting up an htaccess file that had the authentication type as basic, authentication name, user authentication file, which would be the passwords file here, and then they require a valid user. We're going to implement something very similar using the htadigest utility, which is more secure since it passes the password not with plain text like in the previous example, but via encryption. So it's a little more secure, especially if you're going to be using it on a third-party server like your DigitalOcean droplet or another virtual private server that you're on. We want to send things over the wire via encryption so that it's harder for someone else to go ahead and guess, especially if they're listening to any of your communications between your computer and your server. So real quick, let's go ahead and jump into our command line utility. I'm using iterm in this example, as I usually do. You can see that I'm in my Apache directory. So if I print the working directory, I'm within etc/Apache2. And in this directory, in my users folder, I went ahead and I created a digest folder for my passwords. Currently, there's nothing in here, no hidden files, nothing. What we're going to do is we're going to use the htadigest utility, which is very similar to the htapassword utility that we used previously to go ahead and create a password configuration file. So for this one, we're going to pass in the flag for create, which is -C. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to specify where the file is going to be located and what the file is going to be titled. So for this, we're going to add it to our current directory. So since I'm within the digest directory, I can just print the working directory, and I can either specify this or I can add a dot for the current directory. So if I use htaccess, then I create the file, and it's going to be in this current directory under PHPMyAdmin. So as you can see, I'm using the dot for current directory. That way I don't have to specify this entire line right here, or the entire path. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to specify the realm. So it's going to be in my sites.php domain. So I'll just use that as the realm. And then it's going to be for my user John, which I'm going to create right now. So if I hit enter, it's going to probably deny me, so I'm just going to add a sudo in front of it just to make sure it doesn't deny me permission. So I'll sudo that. Now I'm going to add in my password for this, and then again I'll add in my password to confirm. Oops, it looks like they don't match. Let me try that one more time. Alright, so that should have worked. If I go ahead and I view what's in here, I see the PHPMyAdmin hidden file here. So in case you don't know, that dot in front of the file creates a hidden file. That's not easily viewable, so if someone goes ahead and just types in ls, they won't see any files, but if they use the flag to show hidden files, which is -a, they will. Now let's go ahead and let's cat into that file, so PHPMyAdmin, and we'll see what's in there. First, we got the username here. Then we have the realm, which is sites.php. Then we have the hashed password here. So now, if we go ahead and go back into our configuration file here, let me point out a couple of things before I create the htaccess file for our PHPAdmin directory. First of all, we want to have the allow override for our directory here. We want to either set it to all, or you want to set it to auth config, which will allow you to go ahead and use this digest right here. But I'll go ahead and now just leave this as all, and then looks like I just gotta. Then we want to jump into our httpd config file and make sure that we have the digest module installed. So to do that, you want to make sure that you uncomment the line to load the module authentication digest. And you can search for this if you go to the Apache site, look up mod auth digest. This module allows you to use the digest authentication that we're going to be demonstrating here. So I'll make sure that I save that, and then what we'll do is we'll jump back into our terminal application, and let's just check to make sure that everything is set up correctly. And to do that, we just use sudo apache control -t, which is the flag for test, and everything is okay. So now we'll just go ahead and we'll restart our server. So it's going to restart. If I jump back into my browser here and I refresh this page, it's not working. Now, why is it not working? Well, we forgot to go ahead and set up our htaccess file. And this is a common thing that is forgotten. So I just wanted to demonstrate that. If we go into our terminal here now, and I go into my tab for my PHPMyAdmin directory, what I'll do is I'll create a htaccess file. So sudo vim.htaccess. Now the reason why I need to use sudo is because I changed PHPMyAdmin to be owned by _www and to be in the group _www. So let me actually just show you that real quick. So if I go ahead and I lsla, it'll show that we have _www and _www here. And this allows Apache to go ahead and execute the files in here. So let me go ahead and I'll just clear this up, and I'll go ahead and I'll create the htaccess file. Alright, then I'm going to insert some similar configuration to what we used with the basic authentication here. So I'll just paste that in, and let's go over this real quick. As you can see, I'm using the authentication type as digest. We have the auth name, which is basically my realm. I just went ahead and I put that in there, which is sites.php. And then the authentication user file, it's within my etc folder under Apache 2, under users, under digests, within that hidden file of .phpMyAdmin. Then of course we're going to require a valid user here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write and quit out of this. And then now if we go ahead and we check Apache to see if everything is set up correctly, it should be fine. But let's go ahead and restart it so that those configurations go ahead and take effect. I'll jump back into my browser, and if I hard refresh this page, it should go ahead and it should show me that I need to go ahead and log in here. So if I go ahead and I put in the username that I put and the password, it should allow me to access the page. Alright, so that's cool. We now have the digest authentication up and running. Now one thing we could do is we could change the PHPMyAdmin directory to something else. So if I jump back into Sublime and I take a look at my directory here, we have the directory for PHPMyAdmin under this path. So what I could do is I could go into my file system and I could change the path to say something like dash and then some random string of numbers. We could go ahead and we could do that. And then what we could do is we could save this. And then if we restart Apache, we'd have to go ahead and we'd have to make sure that we remember this string here. And then if we go ahead and we go into our file system and I'll just go up one directory, I'll move PHPMyAdmin and I'll move it into a new name, which would be what we pasted in there. And I'll just add that slash to signify a directory. So I'll move that. Looks like we got a permission denied because of that ownership there. So I'll just go ahead and I'll sudo move that. And then if I go ahead and restart Apache now, so I'll go ahead and I'll just make sure that everything is okay. Alright, so the warning, this folder does not exist. This is within one of my virtual host files here. So I can go ahead and probably just leave this and just restart it because I'm not going to be using that virtual host. I'll restart it and then I'll go ahead and I'll put that new string in here and I'll press enter and it should lead us to the same page here, and it does. So what this would allow you to do is just take it off of the typical PHPMyAdmin subdirectory here, which some bots may search for, and it'll add in some other strings here that if they tried to access the PHPMyAdmin directory by just going to sites.phpmyadmin, they wouldn't be able to because it's not found. So that's one thing you could do, and then you could go ahead and implement that with all the other configurations there. So another thing you could do is instead of changing the subdirectory here, you could also go ahead and add a port in there. So instead of changing the subdirectory, or in addition to changing the subdirectory, you simply add a port. And so I'll go ahead and I'll comment out this directory line here. And if you notice, I have a virtual host for another port right below the virtual host for sites. So let's go through the two types of virtual hosts right here. First one is our main sites.php virtual host. That's pointing to my sites folder and it's listening on port 80. Then below that we have virtual host, and I'm using the IP address here for my local machine. That's pointing to port 700. And make sure that if you're going to be implementing something like this, you want to make sure that Apache is going to be listening on that port. So you have to specify listen and then the port number. Then you go ahead and you specify that within the virtual host as well. Now you'll notice a similarity here. We have the server name as sites.php within both of these virtual hosts, but each virtual host is going to be listening on different ports. Then for this one we have the document root. It's a different document root than the actual sites directory. So if we went ahead and specified sites.php, gave it the port number right here, we'd be able to access PHPMyAdmin directly. So let me go ahead and I'll save that. And then I'll go back into my terminal application here, and I'm just going to go ahead and rename my PHPAdmin directory that I went ahead and I set up here. I'm gonna rename it to PHPMyAdmin. I'll go ahead and I will restart Apache, and I'll go back into my browser. Now if I go to sites.php and then I specify that port number, which is 700, it should take me to my PHPAdmin directory, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to ask me for that digest authentication again. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to implement that real quick. I'm able to access my PHPAdmin directory. So that's just one way. And if I go to the main sites.php, it's just going to take me to my main sites folder. And this is by default what's going to be showing. So now that we've set up our port configuration here and we have that set up within our configuration file, you now have the ability to go ahead and choose whether you want it on port or whether you want it in another directory. Now, the next thing we're going to go over is using SSL. So that's using a encrypted kind of a line or communication between you and the server. And we can force PHPMyAdmin to go ahead and use this SSL encryption. One way to do that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to set up SSL just really quick. In a future episode, we can go over setting up your Apache configuration in more detail. But right here, you'll see below I have an uncommented virtual host right here. And this is for the SSL ability, or using HTTPS. What I'll do is I'll uncomment this right here. You'll see that it's pointing to my document root users, John Sanchez sites PHPMyAdmin. So it's going to point me directly to my PHPMyAdmin should I go ahead and use HTTPS with sites.php. It's kind of like using the same port on the same domain. And you can go ahead and you can adjust this accordingly. You can have it just point to the sites directory, which I think I probably should do here. So I'll just go ahead and I'll point it to the sites directory, just like it does in this virtual host, but this is the encrypted version. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just take this and I am going to comment it out. And that way it won't interfere. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'll take this right here. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to place it into our encrypted or HTTP access virtual host. So I'll go ahead and I'll paste that into here, and then I'll uncomment it, and then I'll do the same thing for this virtual host. So this is basically nesting directory within virtual host. It just allows for easier association and readability here. So let me go ahead and let me space this out accordingly. All right, so now keep in mind that we took away that directory here. It's not this directory anymore. It is now just PHPMyAdmin. So that's what we're going to put after we restart the server. So let's go ahead and let's do that. Let's save this file. Once again, go back into terminal. That's sudo apache restart. I really should have checked it before testing. Okay, so everything was okay. Should have restarted fine. And if we take away the port here and just go to sites.php, oops. It looks like I need to add that in front of it, sites.php. That's working. Now if we add PHPMyAdmin, that should work fine too. It's not asking for those credentials because I already inputted them before. But now let's try accessing it with the HTTPS. Oops, HTTPS. Now the reason why it's doing this is because I didn't change this directory. Let me go ahead and let's go ahead and comment that, or not comment, but delete that. Make sure this is pointing to sites. This is the document root. Good. Okay, let's save that. Go back into here, test it one more time, restart it, go back into the browser, refresh the page, and let's see if that works for us. All right, it brings us to PHPMyAdmin, and it's using the HTTPS. Now you might be asking why it didn't ask me again for those credentials, and again, that's just because I verified this before I went ahead and I created this video. So it did ask me for that. It's just not asking me for it again because it's already stored. Now, with that set, we can go ahead and we can force SSL. If we go into the configuration file that we set up, and mine is within the config directory here because I haven't finished the setup for PHPMyAdmin, and if I vim into it, and I'm going to vim into it rather than sudo vim because I'm not going to change anything right now. I'm just going to vim into it, then I'm going to go to the bottom, and you'll see that I'm currently in read-only mode, right? So if I just go to here, I type in A for insert, and warning, I'm just in read-only mode. That's fine. And what you can do is you can use the configuration variable for force SSL, and you can set that to true. So I just went ahead and I pasted it in there. This is in the documentation for PHPMyAdmin, which I'll show you in just a bit. So if I go ahead and I just save this file, again, it won't save because I'm in read-only mode, but I save it with this line, it'll force SSL, and it'll force the browser, if you're going to be using PHPMyAdmin, to use HTTPS. Let me go ahead and okay that. So it's going to use HTTPS. So that is another addition that you might want to add. Next, we should go over the setup configuration for PHPMyAdmin. So if I go into PHPMyAdmin and change that to setup because I haven't actually finished the configuration for PHPMyAdmin, and I click on enter, what that will do is if I take a look at the server, so take a look at this when you're first configuring your PHPMyAdmin setup. If I go to new server and I go to server configuration, it says allow root login. Well, by default, I want to go ahead and check that as no because I don't want the root user to log into my PHPMyAdmin setup. I don't want to give PHPMyAdmin that much control. And it's just because it's my personal preference. If you give root the ability to go ahead and log in, let's say that someone cracked your root login, your credentials, somehow got a hold of it, they can go into your PHPMyAdmin installation should they get past those initial server security things that you set up. Should they get past that, they'd be able to do some real damage to your MySQL setup here. I would recommend unchecking this box if you want to learn more. Say that you've already created your configuration file. If you go ahead and you click on that little icon right there, if you add this to your configuration file, so I'll go ahead and I'll copy that and I'll go back into Vim, and let's say that I added that in. I'll disallow root and I'll set that to false, so I'm not allowing root. Make sure you put that little semicolon there and then you can save the file. So now we're going to be forcing SSL and we're disallowing the root user from logging in. So those are two very useful configurations right there that you can either add before or after you're setting up your configuration. So let's jump back into PHPMyAdmin Setup. Now another thing you could do is just not have PHPMyAdmin installed on your cloud host. You could have it installed on your local computer like I do right now. And then you could just set up the connection through this new server setup here. You can go through all of these steps, set up the connection to your droplet, and then have that access to your MySQL database. That way, no one can actually access your PHPMyAdmin setup except for you. PHPMyAdmin is just a tool to help you administer to your MySQL databases. Now, if you're working as a team and you just need this up on your cloud server, and then just go ahead and just add it to your cloud server without a problem and just implement those security settings that we went over within the past 2 episodes. Now, another thing I want to point you to is the features area where you can go ahead and you can add some security to your PHPMyAdmin setup. A couple of things here I want you to take note of is the force SSL connection. So you don't actually have to manually put that into your configuration file like this. You can specify it here. You can force SSL, which will force it to use the HTTPS. Then you can go through all of this information right here. I personally recommend you taking a look at the reCAPTCHA right here. If you go ahead and click on that icon, it should open up the documentation for this. You can get this service from Google by going to google.com and going to google.com reCAPTCHA, and you can sign up for this service right here and add that to your PHPMyAdmin configuration. And what this would do is, let's say for some reason a hacker was able to use a bot and get through all your security measures for some reason, and now they're trying to crack through your password, so they're just trying to re-enter the form over and over and over. What you can do is you can set up this reCAPTCHA. That way it would be hard for that bot to just do this automatically. They would need to go ahead and view the image and then type that in as well. So that's a cool little service to add in there, and I definitely recommend implementing that when you get the chance. Now, with all of that said, let's go over the configuration file once again. In this episode, we configured the digest ability to go ahead and log in using the digest authentication, which is more secure than the plain text authentication that we showed in the last episode. Then we added the ability to go ahead and access PHPMyAdmin from another directory or another port. After that, we implemented SSL, which I can go into greater detail in a future Apache episode. And then we configured our files to force SSL and then to disallow root. Last but not least, I recommend implementing the reCAPTCHA service right here. And then you have a great tool set to secure your PHPMyAdmin installation. Before we go, I want to show you what it would look like to implement having a directory specified for PHPMyAdmin rather than having to go to https sites.php and then /PHPMyAdmin, because we don't want that to be in that directory. We want it to be in another directory. You could go ahead and go back into our configuration file. You could set this and change the directory for PHPMyAdmin to something else, something just totally random if you want to. And you could go ahead and make sure you change this on the directory level as well. So you change to the PHPMyAdmin directory itself. And then that way, if they go to https sites.php and they type in PHPMyAdmin, they won't actually run into your PHPMyAdmin setup. Then if they are able to find your PHPMyAdmin setup for some reason, somehow, then you would go ahead and they would run into the digest authentication. If they get through that somehow, which is pretty difficult, but let's say they get through that, they wouldn't be able to log in as root because you have that set up right here. And then they'd run into that reCAPTCHA service that you have set up, which would go ahead and it would make it so much difficult to go ahead and crack your login credentials for your MySQL database. Then, of course, I also recommend setting up very difficult passwords for your MySQL users, and you should be pretty set having your PHPMyAdmin set up on the cloud. Again, if you don't need it on the cloud and you'd rather have it on your local host, go ahead and do that. I recommend doing that. That way you don't have to worry about as much of these setup configurations here. But now that you have this arsenal of tools on your tool belt, this should greatly help you with your setup as a developer or server administrator. I hope this episode has helped. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Or if you're a DOCasts member, whether it be free or pro, leave me some feedback in the feedback form, and I'd love to hear from you guys. Again, I hope this helps, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks for watching.